Good morning. Welcome to the inaugural DiligenceVault webinar on the topic of operational due diligence during quarantine. Like so much of what we do at DiligenceVault, this webinar is a collaboration between DiligenceVault and members of the investment community. This will be the first in a series of webinars we will be hosting. Please know that today's discussion is not for attribution, nor have members of the press been invited. This is a private conversation among members of the ODD community. My name is Heidi Thompson Morrow, CFA. I'm client-facing at DiligenceVault, and I'll be your moderator today. Welcome to the Vault. I'm excited to introduce our speakers, two great professionals in the ODD community, Brad Stehle, Managing Director of StepStone Group, and Mike Merrigan, founder of Shadmoor Advisors. To start off, I'd like to share their brief bios with you. Brad Stehle is Managing Director in Operational Due Diligence at StepStone Group. Before joining StepStone, Brad was Managing Director of ODD at Shadmoor Advisors. Prior to that, he was Director of ODD at Unigestion, and before that, Vice President of Business and ODD at Citigroup in Alternative Investment Strategies. Brad holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Seton Hall University. Mike Merrigan is the founder of Shadmoor Advisors, Inc., and he's an entrepreneur specializing in ODD. Prior to launching Shadmoor, Mike was Managing Director of Gotex Fund Management and a member of the investment committee. Prior to Gotex, Mike implemented the first in-house ODD program at General Motors Asset Management. Earlier in his career, Mike worked as a hedge fund analyst at HRJ Capital, a boutique firm, and at Credit Suisse. Mike began his career in the operations group at Gamco Investors. Mike is a graduate of Boston College. Now, each of our speakers will introduce themselves to you and provide a high-level overview of their practice and areas of focus. So, Brad, please tell us about StepStone Group.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you everybody for making the time today to attend this webinar. As she stated, I do work at StepStone. I'm probably one of the old farts in the industry with regards to ODD. We've been performing this for almost 20 years now. Tell you a little bit about our business. Our business is a global private markets firm providing customized investment and advisory solutions to some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. With more than 280 billion of total capital allocations, including over 62 billion in assets under management, StepStone covers a spectrum of opportunities in the markets across the globe from our 19 offices in 13 countries. We integrate fund investments, secondaries, and co-investments across private equity, real estate, infrastructure, and private debt to create solutions that are customized according to the objectives of any private markets investment program. That's a little bit about our firm. We have an estimated 500 employees. Of those 500 employees, we have 9 fully dedicated to operational due diligence across the spectrum of asset classes. We perform an estimated 400 operational due diligence reports a year. About 300 of those are primaries, with about 100 of those, 400 being co-investments and secondary ODD reports. So as you can see, we have a large volume and a large spectrum across all the different asset classes. Michael, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, terrific.
Sure.
Thanks. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Mike.
Brad. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Heidi. I want to also thank the rest of the DiligenceVault team. Also, the approximately 300 registrants that had the time and interest to participate today. That's very kind of all of you to join. It's great to be paired up with Brad Stehle today, a good friend and a former colleague. By way of background, I did Shadmoor in 2014 after having gained 6 years of experience leading the ODD teams at General Motors Asset Management and Fixed Fund Management. Over those 6 years, Shadmoor has grown significantly. Today, we work with a variety of client types in the US, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. A key differentiator of our service offering is that we work with a smaller group of clients in a highly consultative fashion. almost as if we're an extension of each client's organization. In short, we provide clients with operational leverage when they don't have the bandwidth to do this themselves, custom engagements, and access to a very senior ODD team. Our team today consists of 5 persons, almost all of which have very senior levels of ODD experience, and our office is located in Westport, Connecticut.
Okay, terrific. All right then. Well, let's talk about ODD. And for all of the participants, we'd like our discussion to be as interactive as possible. So to that end, as participants in the audience have questions, please contribute them in the Q&A, and we will endeavor to have our speakers address them as we go along. We've got Austin and Kevin on the Diligence Vault team here working with us on feeding in those questions. Okay, first topic here. ODD very fundamentally involves fund managers. So Brad and Mike, from what you've seen, how have managers adapted to the pandemic in terms of BCP and working from home? Has it largely been successful or not? And please address the cybersecurity risk associated with remote setup and employees working remotely. Let's start with Brad.
Thank you for the question. So overall, managers have adapted well to the pandemic, underlying staff working from home. We haven't seen any negative consequences, which I believe is partially attributed to the multiple years ODD professionals have been educating GPs on their technology solutions. Over the past few weeks, I've revisited what we cover as ODD professionals with regards to asset managers' IT solutions, with special reflection on COVID quarantine. We're actually in the process of adding additional vetting points with GPs on the underlying staff setups at home. One area where we can educate the GPs, I think, is to ensure security with staff home setups, especially around routers. Several suggestions we'll be making in the future will be to require a password to gain access to the home's Wi-Fi. If your system does not require this, it's an easy fix in the router settings. Using alphanumeric passwords and not only numeric, which are easier to hack. Second point we would like to bring up is to ensure the router's software is updated. Newer routers that are available on the market have this functionality automatically built in, but older routers require that you reach out and download an update. Again, this can be easily checked on your router settings. Third point, which we would like to start issuing with the underlying GPs, is just to educate them on disabling the remote access, the universal plug and play, also known as UPnP, and Wi-Fi protected setups, which is called the WPSs. These functions make remote access from outside your home easier, but if you don't need these functions outside your home, it's suggested that we turn them off. A fourth point that we'd like to cover with the GPs is to set up a guest network on your Wi-Fi system. This functionality provides guests to your Wi-Fi connection, but keeps them from obtaining access to the rest of your network, i.e. like laptops, iPads, printer functions. It provides more of a secure environment for your current devices. Last point is, if at all possible, always use an Ethernet connection at home instead of your Wi-Fi. This provides an additional layer of security, especially with using the connection to perform cash movements and or authorizing wire payments. So these are just some of the things that we've thought about that historically, I think in the industry, we always thought of, do your staff have VPN connections? Is it dual authentication? We never really thought about the Wi-Fi connections or the personal home setup with routers and switches and things of that nature. I think, again, it's hard to verify on an individual basis when we perform ODD, so I think it's more of an educational point, like many that we do historically with GPs while conducting ODD, in order to educate them on these type of topics and to see if they can incorporate it in their work environment.
Okay, those are some great thoughts and suggestions, Brad. Mike, anything to add here? What are your perspectives? BCP and remote setup?
Yeah, I think they're probably, Brad's comments are accurate in the sense that the home setup probably hasn't been paid attention to as much. Taking a step back on a higher level, I guess we would also say that investment managers, their transition from office to remote work has by and large been unremarkable, based upon the discussions that we've had with managers. The technological components of having a massive scale of personnel working from home seems to be something that everyone will be prepared for. On a lighter note, I'd say the psychological component was probably not as well prepared for. Something we're all still adopting to. Potentially something we have to add to the BCP plan next year. I'd say probably the biggest thing about disaster recovery plans is the duration. The duration of what was typically planned for is probably more akin to floods, snowstorms, hurricanes, burst pipes in the office. Probably not something as protracted as this has been, and probably will continue to be. So I think that'll probably be a bigger focus going forward, but again, no near-term impact. We've obviously seen some cybersecurity related risks, with some of the video conferencing that's been happening, things like that. But by and large, investment managers were certainly well prepared. And I think also in terms of cybersecurity as well, which when this news first broke was probably one of the higher concerns with respect to this. I think ODD played a role in driving that preparedness. It was for years now, it's been a part of our focus and something that investment managers knew that they were going to have to ask about. And certainly cybersecurity has been an increased focus. And it's also been a focus of privacy regulations in the US and also the SEC has been a focus of their examinations. So I think all of those factors had a role in making what could have been, potentially problematic transition into one that I'd say has gone very, very smoothly. And I think we're all fortunate.
Okay. Well, Mike, that was a great point about the contributions of the ODD community to the overall preparedness for the current environment. Thank you for that. Okay. Next question here. How about your own teams at Shadmoor and StepStone? How have you all adapted to working remotely? Let's go to Mike to start this one.
Sure. So Shadmoor team, 5 of us, we owe, a huge debt to Align Communications, which is our technology partner. We've been working with them for a number of years. They're an MSP and a cybersecurity consulting firm as well. They left us very well prepared for this. The transition for the 5 of us from working from the office to home was seamless. We've been able to, we have 3 members that reside in Connecticut and New York, and the collaboration is seamless. Our work product and workflow has been seamless. We had already established a number of the persons on the team had already set up home offices that were in many cases as elaborate or close to as elaborate as the ones at their physical desk in the office. So this transition was very smooth in the sense of even the acclimation part of it. Interestingly, we've really been using Microsoft Teams a lot more over the last few months, more than we've ever had before, which from a collaboration perspective, we've also found to be really helpful.
Okay, thanks for those comments. Brad, how about you? How's your team adapting at StepStone?
StepStone ODD staff has adjusted very well. The underlying policy before coronavirus was to have a replica working station set up at home to provide employees with flexibility between their work and home lifestyles. In reality, in this day and age, having an employer that understands the outside demands on its staff and provides flexibility to its employees is critical for staff retention. So common practice that we've always done is that we've always abided by to ensure information is centralized within our servers and easily accessible for underlying ODD staff in the rare emergency a colleague needs to take over for their underlying report they're working on. Our teams always had a virtual weekly meeting to ensure everyone felt connected. but have increased this frequency by adding virtual lunches, happy hours, even sending to the group funny jokes or messages. Dare I say, I'm not a comedian, but since being quarantined and indulging in a Snapple iced tea in the afternoons, I've even departed their fun facts under the bottle cap as our quote unquote daily wisdom of knowledge provided by Snapple. These a few additional touch points with the team has kept everyone, dare I say, grounded, but also keep the human spirit alive. The best is when loved ones during our video conference or family members or pets join, interrupting us during our actual discussions. So it alleviates some of the pressures of working from home. We found that, having these couple additional touch points throughout the week has helped the team deal with the underlying changes of working strictly from home. But overall, like I mentioned, our staff has been pretty adjusted. We do have a pretty flexible schedule where we can, work from home, work from the office for periods of time, just to provide that extra added flexibility to them.
Okay, terrific. And we're seeing a question coming in here from Hansi Marotra on the Diligence Vault team. She's our Asia partner, and she's adding in a global component here. And you folks have had a global aspect to your careers, both of you, and still do, I'm sure. So Hansi wants to know, do you cover managers in emerging markets like India? And how well prepared were they compared to those in developed markets? Any comments on that? How about we start with you for this one, Brad?
India specifically, not that I can think of off the top of my head with regards to most recent contacts with that region, with that country. Regionally, yes, we do work with Asian managers, actually quite a lot. But specifically with India, it's hard for me to comment because I don't remember off the top of my head if we have spoken to one within the last 6 weeks with regards to ODD on that topic. But we are currently working on and have within the last few weeks multiple managers in the Asia region. Overall, they've been very well set up. They've been able to produce their underlying documentation required for us to do our work. So I think they've been pretty readily set up in order to handle this crisis. Obviously, with these type of quote unquote viruses or respiratory, they've been more prevalent in the Asian market. So their lifestyles, they're a little bit more used to the different changes where compared to Europe and the US, this has been a very big life-changing event for the underlying employees, where again, this is more of I dare to say common practice, but it's happened more frequently out in Asia.
Okay, terrific. Mike, any updates from you on the Asia front or emerging markets?
We haven't covered last month or so, or at least since the pandemic started, any managers that had operations, I would say, limited to just being in India. We've definitely had managers that have had a presence both in terms of developed countries and also had offices in emerging markets. To the best of our knowledge, those transitions from working remotely to, from office to working remotely went well, and probably with the assistance of technology, obviously being helpful to that. One of the things that might be an offshoot of this question, although not directly, is that a number of the hedge fund managers and private equity too, their service providers, administrator, something along those lines, they tend to have operations in some of the emerging markets. And so there certainly has been questions posed, in the ODD community about whether or not those operations have been able to maintain continuity as expected, because a lot of organizations are global. They've chosen to follow the sun model, where operations are hand throughout the course of a 24-hour day. So we don't know of any concerns that were highlighted to us that were probably worthy. That specific aspect of it is probably one where I think it could touch upon that people may want to ask going about ODD, especially with respect to managers, providers that have international operations.
Sure. Great point on the service providers. Thanks, Mike. I'm just looking here at the Q&A, and we've got Todd Lusk chiming in that he's also done some work with Asia, with India and Singapore and Mauritius, and was seeing pretty smooth operations there as well. Then we have Leighton Stratter here with a question from what we've already covered a little bit. Do you see the managers and the allocators that you're working with revisiting their BCP in this environment? Are you seeing them modifying things here as we go along? How about let's start with Mike on this one.
Probably too soon to say. I mean, there's no question about it that, you know, we'll be reviewing everything. All these organizations will be, as to what worked, what didn't. Fortunately, most things work. But I do believe that that will be the case. That's probably many months from now. I would say in the near term, it's probably maintaining the current environment, the current situation, then transitioning to how do we get people back to the office. Don't want to really commit to a timeline on that, but I know that in conversations we've had in recent weeks with managers, that is something they're thinking about. Are they going to stagger staff? Are they going to you know, have some people who, you know, maybe live in a smaller home space come into the office, and things like that, or, you know, more vulnerable employees with respect to their own personal health. Those, in my mind, are the things that are coming up now, less so about trying to, you know, rebuild, but certainly I think in the future that will be, that will certainly be the case.
Okay, terrific. Brad, anything to add here?
No, I pretty much agree with Michael. I mean, it's early. We have reached out to GPs in this current market via phone and emails. We are in the process of utilizing DV and tailoring a questionnaire that will be sent out to our underlying GPs with more specific points with regards to BCP and other areas and compliance and things of that nature. So we will be having it documented across the firms where we can easily manipulate the data and come up with an overall statistical analysis on how the overall firms have dealt with certain touch points. But again, I think, you know, for documentation purposes, i.e., you know, updating BCP policies and disaster recovery policies and cybersecurity policies, I think that's more time for action right now to make sure that everything is working fine. I think the documentation side aspect of it will come later on in the year when they review the total policies from front to back and able to adjust for what they put in place now for any adjustments they have made. So, you know, requesting their quote unquote BCP policy right now, I think is a little bit fruitless, because a lot of the firms have never thought of having all their employees work from home, and possibly that a single option that can be considered an issue. I think you'll see this being formally documented in the latter half of this year and how they dealt with it and the improvements that they have made. But, you know, getting the okay from the managers right now that they have experienced no issues or how they have adjusted their policies is a great idea, and something that we're acting upon as we speak now.
Okay, terrific. So we've got a couple more questions coming in, but I think we're gonna get to those topics. So we'll move forward with the program and then pick up with those questions. So our next point here, we wanted to dive a little deeper into what your respective firms are seeing in terms of ODD activity since the pandemic took hold. What is the volume of your workload, and is it more or less than you expected? How about Brad? Let's start with you on this one.
Overall, the volume has stayed relatively the same, with obtaining underlying information a little slower. And GPs have been moving back the close dates on their funds from 4 to 6 weeks. Now, this is with regards to private markets. In the meantime, you know, ODD team has been using this time to work on additional internal projects, such like as, you know, we are in the process of integrating DV into our systems and updating DDQs, and as well as policies and procedures. But overall, it's the flow of information from the GPs has been a little slower initially when this started happening. I think now they've all acclimated to the current environment, and we've seen that timeline actually decrease, i.e. getting the information. So there was a slow point in the beginning, but now I think it's getting a little bit back to normal with regards to the flow of information, so everybody can do their underlying work.
Okay, terrific. Mike, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think in early March, as the magnitude of the pandemic was being recognized by everyone, we experienced a modest slowdown in initial ODD reviews. So those are reviews where someone is not invested in the fund or the manager before. I'd say investors were probably taking a pause for about a month. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen a tick. I think in terms of separating initials from with respect to the monitoring of existing investments, that's sort of been very steady with respect to offsite questionnaires. Many people are in the mode right now of reviewing audit financial statements, which have been coming out and will continue to come out really December 31st of the year for the funds. So we expect those monitoring aspects to continue unabated for the foreseeable future. We didn't really do much outreach ourselves, between early March and early April. We wanted to just give people time to get their bearings on the situation, especially those that were most personally affected. I feel as if a lot more people are adjusted now, and there's greater acceptance of the new reality we're living in, acceptance of the likelihood that we're potentially in a more protracted situation. And I think, while everyone's unsure of the timeline, I think we're now moving more towards, constructive conversations about, how are we going to adopt, given the potential for this protracted environment we're in.
Okay. So then our next question here is, how are managers adapting to virtual ODD? Let's start with Mike on this one.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely managers that are focused on raising capital. And I think that they've recognized that in the absence of these on-site visits that typically would occur, there is a gap that needs to be bridged. And how do we bridge? And even if we can't bridge it completely, can we compromise on things that were maybe uncompromisable, a month or two ago? And I think we are seeing evidence, at least anecdotally, of some flexibility, especially on behalf of the managers. Here's some kind of ideas I think that are, we're seeing a greater allowance for time dedicated to phone calls and conferences. I think prior to a month ago, most people's expectation of being on a phone for more than a half hour was sort of anathema, but that's changed. I think people are willing to spend multiple hours on the phone now, or maybe breaking it up into multiple hour phone calls. We've obviously seen a proliferation of video conferences. So there's been a generosity, on behalf of the investment managers with respect to that flexibility and the time that they're willing to allot to what used to be more in-person type meetings. I'd also say that with respect to technology, we may still not get electronic files, certain documents that we want, but that there's a willingness to maybe share them via a shared screen. And the same with sort of systems demos, something you might be doing in person when you were on site at an investor, and now maybe you're going to do virtually. So I do think that there are some concrete examples of a willingness on behalf of the investment managers to offer more, given that on-sites have been hamstrung and probably are for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so a small follow-on to that, and a question here, and then we'll send it over to Brad. But Luke Dixon is asking about this, to view systems and operational workflows of a manager remotely. Are managers willing to share screens with you, or does that present a cybersecurity risk? You were just discussing shared screens there, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it could potentially be a cybersecurity risk. I think, if people are in, encrypted video conferences with a very limited number of attendees, usually one or two people, I'd say that risk is fairly low. and probably offset by transparency appreciation. Obviously, you could approach that in two ways, but I think the offset being that the increased transparency is preferable to the to the probability of it being a real cybersecurity risk. There are certainly situations where I think people are concerned in the investment management side where they're saying, hey, I'm going to give you this increased transparency. I don't want you to take a screenshot of something that I'm not sending to you in an electronic file format. But I think, between NDAs and good faith, some of those things have been able to be worked out. And that, I think, hopefully Brad can attest to that as well.
Terrific. Yes, Brad, over to you on this topic.
I think Mike, to be honest with you, is spot on and really has the same viewpoints that I have and what we were seeing as well. So overall, again, just to reiterate, I think the GPs have adapted very well to the virtual ODD. The GPs have been well organized, have been transparent. Well, I would probably add, we've made it a point when we're utilizing the conference calls. We're trying not to do things over the phone, at least within the ODD department. We're trying to do it via video conference and have live feeds. With the setups that we have currently, at least my staff, I mean, they have multiple screens, i.e. very large screens. So it's like having the person right in front of you and doing live feeds and not just having a solid background to that conversation. It brings you more in line to actually having a conversation of an on-site visit. Again, you can never take away from doing an on-site visit, but this is getting a little bit closer compared to technology 10 years ago when we're all working off a 12-inch monitor. I mean, most of my staff now has, 2 foot plus monitors, multiple monitors. Yeah. So it's more interaction. It's almost as real as it being at the on-site meeting, especially with the quote unquote clarity that you have with these video conferences now compared to, even 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But again, there are times where certain documents the GPs don't want to provide to you in electronic format. So you normally see that while you're doing your on-site visit. Some managers, just to affirm what Mike said, have been providing you access to those documents via sharing of the screen and actually giving you the ability to take over the screen in their file and providing you as much ample time as you'd want to go through the file or any other files you would deem necessary. But overall, I think it's been, pretty seamless. I think everybody's adjusted pretty well with, changing from having to do on-sites to doing it remotely. And I think, people that have been experienced in ODD have been able to come up with different ways to attack the underlying problems or the underlying verification requirements for their processes in a virtualized environment.
Okay, and as a follow-on, we have a question coming in here from Laura Chen, who wants to know on the subject of on-site ODD visits, are you seeing firms still conducting on-site ODD visits, or has anybody gone back to it? She says she can see video conference as an interim substitute for an existing relationship where on-site has been conducted, but she's struggling with on-site visits for new relationships. So what are your thoughts there, Brad, as you were just mentioning this?
A lot of our underlying GPs we invest in, we've had real long historical relationships with them. So we've conducted multiple on-site visits, whether it be on the deal side or on the ODD side and things in that nature. With new managers, again, it all depends on the asset class you're talking about, the type of underlying operations and middle back offices that are entailed. Obviously, a middle back office is more entailed in the liquid markets compared to the private markets. Liquid markets, you can have up to 500 investors into a fund and trading multiple thousands of transactions per day, where the private markets are very limited in the number of investors in their fund to 10 or 15 on average, and producing anywhere between 10 to 20 investments in the whole life cycle of the fund, which is on estimate 12 years.
Okay. Great insights. Mike, what might you have to contribute to that question?
Well, the topic of virtual ODD, especially in the circumstance of initial investments is probably the biggest focal point of the ODD community right now. We've been fielding calls about it. We've been having conversations with our clients about it. And I think everyone's looking for a roadmap. We're in the process of working on a white paper that we're going to publish later this week. But I'm happy to provide some sound bites on that. But I think where the end investor allocator is considering an investment, but has never been on site at the manager's office and obviously is unable to in the near future, that's really a paradigm shift with respect to expectations and procedures and best practices. I think, at a high level, our view is that every investor has a unique operational risk profile. And outside of some sort of extreme risk, there really isn't this pass or fail notion of ODD. We want to identify all the reasonable risks, which ones an investor can live with, which ones they want to remediate, and in some circumstances, they may move on or entirely new opportunity or try to fix some things. So that's the reality. The discussions we're having with clients and non-clients is really within those parameters. So what is the client's operational risk? What is the operational risk of the strategy that is in focus? Looking at valuation, liquidity, custody, the oversight by third parties, an investor's familiarity with the manager, the fund terms. Our view is that each situation has its own facts and circumstances, and that the totality of those factors is what's going to lead you to the conclusion of what works best for your organization or an investor. And it could be different from one client to another. We've had a lot of these conversations over the last few weeks. There are situations that our clients had proposed to us and we backed off from because we thought maybe the strategy was too esoteric, or some of the risks that I had highlighted earlier, those factors were just not something we could get comfortable with. And vice versa, there have been situations where there may have been hesitancy on the client, and we said, for these reasons, we think we can get comfortable. So those are sort of the perspectives I would say that people should be thinking about. And these are the situations when it's helpful to have an ODD consultant engaged, because there aren't clear answers, and sometimes it's helpful to have conversations with someone who can provide perspective across a lot of investment strategies and a lot of different types of investors.
Okay, great perspective, Mike. So then the next topic we'll move along to here is, how are your clients, the investors, adapting to the concept of virtual ODD? You touched on that a little bit, Mike. Let's go to Brad for this.
For the most part, the LPs have been reacting very well, especially as most of them are in the same COVID boat with travel restrictions as we are, and now utilizing video conferences instead. We have received more than usual ODD questions from our LPs, a little bit more higher volume of late. And that's great, because that means that they're involved and they're part of the process, and obviously they're thinking about concerns that should be addressed. But we've been, for the most part, able to put their minds at ease with regards to the process that we have in place and the flexibility that we have incorporated in our processes. I mean, obviously, each LP is going to have a different level of due diligence experience, depending on their markets they invest in. And the markets have been performing ODD, as everybody knows, for over 20 years, whereby the private markets, in my opinion, still is in its ODD infancy, and still we're educating the GPs on the type of institutional processes that we expect or we want to incorporate or are incorporated, as we ODD professionals would like to see it. So again, as long as you have a flexible program that incorporates and have the means to perform your underlying duties and requirements, there's very little that you really can't do between a virtual world and an on-site world. But again, there's no taking back that, sitting there in the office or quote unquote on-site is a preferable means to doing your day-to-day duties.
Okay, great. Mike, anything further to add there?
Yeah, I would just say that at face value, it feels very foreign to people when we start to discuss it and discuss the possibility of it. And in some cases, people have concerns like, I'm a fiduciary. What, does it make sense that I would potentially make an investment in a hedge fund and not be able to visit this manager or have never seen them? So we have a lot of those conversations recently. And I think, it's important to understand what you're trying to get out of the on-site. I mean, I think the on-sites really offer three things. One is you have the ability to interview people and assess their, let's say, their knowledge, their capabilities, their qualifications face-to-face. Some of that can be done over video conferencing. The second is this notion of on-site testing. So that's the ability to maybe review things, see demonstrations of systems, things like that probably won't be electronically distributed in a file format to you. We talked earlier about how some of that has been compensated for in the sense of the shared screens and generally just being a little bit more generous with respect to time and in terms of sharing information electronically. The third issue that you hope to get from the on-site, which is now missing, is the ability to assess the physical office environment. So how secure is it? Are there other investment managers in that space? Is there, is information, how are people grouped together? Is information, conspicuously left on people's desks? Do they maintain confidentiality? There's a lot of information that comes from those three things. But I think in the absence of that, you also have to keep in mind that those are a smaller component, at least with respect to time, of the total process. There's all the third-party verifications that you still get to do. There were mitigating factors to the first two things I said about assessing people through video conferencing, the testing through video conferencing. Those have been helpful. They're not a substitute, but they can be acceptable. So I think the other factor here too is that I think a lot of people's concern about on-site, especially with new money, is related to the idea of, well, I'll just wait. I'll wait a month or two, and then I'll decide if I'm going to move forward with this. That strategy seems quite reasonable, but I also am of the mind, especially as just more and more of this, the details of this come on, the news comes out, we're probably in a protracted situation here that could go on for a year or so. And I don't necessarily think that investment managers are going to want people in their office that are strangers because it could potentially endanger their own employees. So while the on-site is very, very valuable, and I never want to undermine it, it's probably a situation that we're going to have to adopt to for maybe for quite some time. Because the other risk, which could be equally, in violation of being a fiduciary, is you remain in allocations that continue to underperform because good substitute managers or funds you can't visit on site, and therefore you will not invest in them. That, in my mind, could also become problematic. So, throwing a lot of different factors out at people just in the last 5 or 10 minutes, but the totality of all of those things is what's leading people, to come to conclusions about these discussions and whether or not they should make these investments or not. And I think in many cases, the virtual ODD will be sufficient.
Okay, a lot of thoughts there. So thank you. And as long as we're on the topic of investors, we have a question here from Ashley Roach, who wants to know, what is the biggest risk investors should be concerned about from an operational perspective in this environment? Mike, do you want to continue along here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to look at things more, on a case-by-case basis, more on a strategy type level. I think there are operational risks that are much more prevalent in certain types of strategies versus others. And even more specifically, there are operational risks that are more frequent in certain strategies, less in others, and vice versa. So I wouldn't say there's one big operational due diligence risk right now. I think you'd have to look at the investment strategy, the manager, the context of what's going on in the environment, the assets that are in the portfolio, and those things would dictate to you where your area of focus should be. There are clearly certain types of investment strategies right now that are probably under more duress than others, and those potentially could be more operational or risky, and those should probably be your area of focus, as opposed to checking with every manager about one big risk. If assuming that you have constraints, related to time and capital and in your ODD process.
Okay, terrific. Brad,
I
contributions?
think Mike is pretty much spot on with that response. It depends on what asset class we're talking about. What sub asset class are we talking about? Is it in the liquid markets? Is it in the private markets? I think right now there's undue pressure, and you're going to see this obviously in the valuations in the liquid markets, where you're going to have the impact dramatic in the beginning. I think, there will be changes in valuations in the private markets over a period of time. But again, it depends on the underlying covenants of the LPA agreements. You can trigger covenants in the liquid markets a lot quicker with regards to the valuation, where you have to liquidate your underlying positions because you're down 20, 30%. You have investors redeeming or pulling their money. Again, in the liquid markets, in the private markets, it's more succinct, where you're invested for 12 years. So you don't have those undue influences. You can have your underlying client sell their position in the secondary market, but in the end, the assets are still going to stay in the fund. So we don't have that undue pressure compared to the liquid markets. And again, like Mike's pointed out, I don't think there's quote unquote one silver bullet operational due diligence question you need to be asking in this current environment across the board. Again, it really determines on your asset class, on the risks, on the manager's sustainability, things of that nature. You're going to have more impact with regards to business sustainability in the liquid markets than you will in the private markets. Again, because their fee structures are on the quote unquote AUM that they're managing, which is going to be reflected really quickly on a monthly basis on most parts for the liquid markets. Where in the private markets, again, you have a stable assets at the manager. Fee structures based on management fee, which is quarterly, so that's not going to change. And with regards to performance fees, until the asset is realized, i.e. sold, there's no performance fee that's being paid. Which you don't have that which you have the opposite in the liquid markets. And you're paying performance fees based on the rate of return that's projected, whether the asset has been sold or still in the book. So it's again, there's no silver bullet operational question that I think is prevalent across the entire industry, or it is not just one thing you need to be looking at. It really depends on the manager, the asset, the situation they're in, other undue influences or other issues. That's where, ODD specialists that have been doing this for a long period of time, that have lived through other crises, seen how the environments of the market have affected GPs in certain asset classes. They can utilize that experience in order to project on what's going to happen in the future or currently right now.
Okay. Okay, great. So then our next topic here is, let's talk the range of opinions you're seeing on virtual ODD, particularly with regard to concerns. And there are a couple of questions, again, from participants that I wanted to feed in. So broadly, we were going to talk about your gap analysis of on-site due diligence versus virtual, and a couple of questions with specifics here to add. Is Chris Young wants to know, is there still advantage for video conference since people from GP side also work from home? And an anonymous attendee is asking if virtual meetings are also used to conduct operational reviews for both new and existing. And we've maybe touched on this a little bit, but this is our question about the range of opinions on ODD and what we're seeing here. Let's start with Mike for this one.
Sure. So I think the first question was, if you're having a virtual conference, video conference with someone of the general partner, is that still valuable? Did I get that right?
Yes.
That was the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So absolutely. So So going back to the three things that I'd mentioned just a couple minutes ago about the onsite, what are you trying to get out of the onsite? You're trying to interview people and assess their knowledge capabilities, preferably in person. Do testing and assess the office environment. Those are the three things that you do on site. And there's probably even more than that, but let's put them in those three broad categories. Number one, by having the video conference, you're absolutely still, in a limited sense, but it's still valuable for sure, able to have conversations with someone, assess things. They're still able to show documents for you. You're able to gain all of their institutional knowledge about the organization that you're, potentially going to invest in one of their funds. So no question about it that is still a valuable exercise. No question about it. I think the second part of the question was virtual meetings versus new and existing. We touched upon that. I'll just kind of revisit it a little bit, but I think there's definitely, there is not a consensus about virtual ODD for new investments. There's no question about it. And nor should there be, because everyone has a different risk profile. There's a very broad range of investment strategies. Some of those strategies have much more operational risk than others. The facts and circumstances will certainly dictate that. Virtual ODD will probably be the norm for monitoring for quite some time, because I just don't see anyone who's already been in the office needing to. I don't think the managers are going to want people in the office for safety reasons. So that leaves you with, what about virtual ODD for new or initial investments, which again is probably the main crux of a lot of people's questions. And we touched upon a number of those factors earlier. And again, if anyone wants to reach out, happy to explore them further with you. But I think we kind of already laid out, how there are instances where video conferencing can help you bridge some of that gap, maybe not all of it, but in many cases enough to potentially to move forward. But again, it's not in every circumstance. It's facts and circumstances, the person's risk profile, the investor, the totality of the situation that will guide whether or not that makes sense. And it may not make sense for one group versus another.
Yeah, terrific. And we want to look at the future as well. But Brad, comments to add on this question here?
Obviously, there are a wide range of opinions on virtual ODD, but also, as we pointed out, you need to take into context again the asset classes, the sophistications of the underlying GPs, which can range from liquid to private markets, as well as well-established GPs to startups. Overall, I think StepStone has been able to perform every check that we would normally do on site virtually by using this technology. And the only thing I think that we may not be able to check, giving this a little bit more thought, is with regards to the verification of the building security or the office's security, or with regards to physically seeing the server room, which is another point that we would try to make when we're on site. The remainder of our evidence-based testing, we have over 25 items that we normally do for evidence-based testing, can be performed ahead of time if the manager provides you with the information either virtually or the actual files that need to be reviewed ahead of time. I guess going back to the 2 points I raised earlier with building security and the server room, I think these risks are mitigated as the majority of the private markets are working in a virtual environment compared to the liquid markets. So in essence, the GP only has limited IT on site with regards to, they just have routers or switches and a backup UPS, where, the liquid markets tend to have more of the server set up. Every IT is done in-house, which obviously brings more cybersecurity and complications and things to check on when you're on site. In reality, probably to mitigate the factor with regards to building security, I guess we could reach out to the building leasing agent and obtain verification on how the building is secure. Do you have staff at a front desk? Is there turnstiles? Is badge required? How is it set up? How's the office, quote unquote, set up? Can you walk into the office, or is it a badge required, things of that nature? And like Mike pointed out, some of the things that you would also look at on site is there a shared office space, or is it the only company that's in this office space? If there's not, is there a Chinese wall between information on one company to the other? So again, it's a plethora of things that we could literally talk about for hours.
Okay, we don't necessarily have hours.
No, we don't.
And we wanted to get to, we have a number of questions also that have come in with a look forward, what's next for ODD. So, and we discussed this in our prep. So how does ODD look if the pandemic continues for another few months, or accepting the theory that a vaccine will not be available for another year or two, so that ODD cannot really return to the pre-pandemic practice for quite some time? How does this look, and what does an increasing adoption of virtual ODD mean for fund managers and how they operate? Do we need to prepare for the rise of virtual managers who have no primary office and who are just a group of individuals? So, we'd kind of discussed that scenario, and we have questions as well. So Beth Gillier asks, what behavior are you looking for from managers as restrictions start to get lifted? For example, keeping external parties from their office, 50-50 split for the team for work from home and work in office, et cetera. We discussed some of these things. So what's ODD look like going forward? Brad, let's start with you on this one.
Well, I'm not an expert in the medical world or the political world, so you can take my opinion with a grain of salt on this. I do feel that ODD professionals need to take into account both aspects of performing ODD on site as well as remotely, and amend their processes as they deem fit for the underlying level of risk that is acceptable for them. As everyone in ODD knows, each LP has a different risk tolerance than the next. So our job is to vet out the GPs and provide the LPs or the investment committees that we're working with the material required so they can make their best educated and informed decision on investments. With regards to reopening your question from the person attending the conference, obviously a lot of firms are putting projected things in place right now, whether we just go back to business as normal in one day, which obviously I don't think that will happen, to doing rotating basis. 50% of the staff will be in the office for the first 2 weeks and then rotate it out to the other 50%, or part of the staff will come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week. The other part will come in on Tuesday and Thursday, and then flip it for the following week. So there's multiple variances of trying to be flexible. And I think that's where you'll end up seeing time-wise. Again, I'm not a medical expert. It could be tomorrow. It could be a month from now. I mean, obviously for the New York area, which is where I'm located, that's locked down, I believe, until May 14th or 15th. So I don't think they'll see any ease on our industry until that point in time. I'm not expecting the offices to go back before then. I think it'll be at a later date, possibly, end of May or maybe right after the holiday, 1st of June. And, again, we just have to live by the guidance that's provided by the federal, local, and state governments, and to see what kind of options we have. So again, everybody's putting multiple options on the table. And then once we obtain some guidance from the federal, state, and local levels, we can institute one of those policies within the firm that we've already put in place.
Terrific. Mike, your thoughts on the future of ODD?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm thinking this is probably a protracted, situation, and that I think we're going to have to adopt what was sort of best practice in 2019 is probably going to evolve slightly for the next year or so. I hope not longer. So we have our own ideas. I mean, I think it starts with how do people get to work. I think it's going to be hard for people to get to work. I mean, mass transit can't be mass anymore. Even with everyone wearing masks, I just can't see people, flooding commuter trains and things like that, especially for people who have the option not to. Same with airplane travel and things like that. So I think any type of commuting, traveling is going to continue to be scaled back. I really, I think managers are going to be hesitant to have strangers in their office that don't work there. I think for safety reasons, for personal reasons, I don't think they're going to just have a rotating list of ODD, IDD people that are going to be, they're just going to keep setting up meetings and allowing all these people to come in and meet with members of their staff, even if they're 6 feet apart. I'm kind of surprised if that happens. What I am thinking though is that more of this will be virtual. I think that there will be more transparency and more flexibility on the investment manager side. That may come in the form of or the exchange for more NDAs so that they can provide more flexibility and they may be more strict. I think there might be a possibility, this is probably one of my more off the wall ideas, but there might be a possibility where you end up meeting with people from the manager outdoors. So if you can get to a location because you live in close proximity and they'll meet with you, they may not want you in their office, but maybe they'll meet with you outdoors, maintaining social distance. So you still get the benefit of meeting them in person and gaining access to their knowledge. But that's something I could see potentially happening. The last thing I would say is to get investors comfortable with giving people money where they may not be as familiar with the manager, i.e. these sort of initial reviews we're talking about where there's no on-site. You may see more sort of what people sometimes refer to as, a demand for more bad actor clauses, where if something extraordinary happens, different than a key person clause, but a bad actor clause, where something extraordinary happens to the firm or the principals, that there's an extraordinary liquidity right. I think those are not that often. I think you might see more of those to get people comfortable to say, hey, you didn't get the full look into us that you would have gotten a year ago because you didn't come on site, but we're going to do this in exchange for giving you more comfort that if something goes wrong, you have some more options than you typically would. So those are some ideas that have been sort of on my mind about how things are going to change. But the idea that we're going to approach anything close to normal if we quote unquote wait a month or two, in my mind, I'm not of that mind.
Okay. Yeah, so that's answered a number of questions here from some of the folks, Stuart Chapman on the duration of the pandemic, and Kelly Finnegan wanting to know how the current virtual nature of ODD reviews will change the process in the future. I think we've touched on these, and I know that we're over time, but there are a couple of more questions that have come in, so perhaps we can ask our speakers just to answer these as we wind down our call. How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay, great. So Jorge de la Fuente wants to know, what role can third-party service providers play, especially given their physical proximity, being in manager hubs like New York, London, or LA, in conducting ODD once proximity restrictions have been lifted or eased? And Chris Young chiming in also with virtual ODD on the cost perspective. Does that save cost? What kind of cost benefit elements does that introduce? Any thoughts on these topics? Brad?
Would you mind repeating the first part of it?
Oh, sorry. It was
The
the
cost
role
savings.
of, yeah, the role of third-party service providers, especially given physical proximity to manager hubs in conducting ODD.
If your ODD process is part of conducting on-site ODD with regards to service providers, we do that for particular asset classes and particular service providers currently. Again, it's going to be in a virtualized environment right now because most people are not going to be working from home. I'm going to be working from home and not in the offices. So again, I think, you just need to be flexible with the processes that we've always done historically and come up with new ways or workarounds in order to obtain the underlying information that we've normally done historically and to be able to provide the underlying entities and the investment committees the reporting that they required in order to make an educated decision on the investment. So again, flexibility is going to be key in this environment. Setting up a process where I'm not going to invest in any manager because I haven't done an on-site visit. I mean, right now we're in market dislocation right now. This historic market dislocation. advantage of this and to put your money to work. I mean, it's their fiduciary responsibility to do so instead of just waiting until things calm down so we can perform an on-site visit. So again, I think, overall, with the market dislocation, there still will be investment decisions. I think people that have been doing ODD for an extended period of time and have created workarounds to normal problems or processes can figure out a way to do this virtually at this point in time until we can get to a better sustainable place where, we can do on-site visits.
Okay, great.
as
Thank you.
required.
Thanks for that, Brad. Mike, thoughts on that topic?
Sure. So on third-party service providers, I wasn't sure if that was referring to the managers of the funds. We always speak to them, so that will continue, and third-party confirmations are the sort of gold standard of what we do.
Some
in terms of
consultants were mentioned in that question, for example.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there is, of course, there could be situations where someone, like if Shadmoor is closely approximated to New York City and we could go and do this on site for someone, assuming the managers allow people in, there is certainly a possibility. And this question, of course, if their travel costs can be cut, there is tremendous cost savings, for the end investor, for sure.
Okay, terrific. And a couple of last questions here from Matthew Hartso and Stuart Chapman again. How do you get managers comfortable with sharing regulatory communication remotely? So far, the managers that Matt has talked to have been reluctant to provide via Zoom or protected interlinks their documents. Stuart wants to know about impacts on vendors and background checks and getting valuation policies, compliance manuals, redacted side letters, SEC letters, etc. Thoughts on that? Let's start with you on this one, Mike.
Yeah, I mean that the regulatory letter one is definitely something that will be a sticking point. I mean, I think some of the managers, they may be okay with it, some not. I mean, again, I kind of referenced earlier that I think we may see more NDAs in place here, because just so if people are willing to go the extra mile to get you comfortable, they're going to need more assurance, meaning the managers. So I see this maybe more end going forward because of those types of things, so that you can get the transparency that in some cases was only available on site. To the question about the other documents, valuation policies, I mean, that's generally something you can get in advance. Compliance manuals, less so, but we are finding in some cases we can either view those electronically through a shared screen, or we've gotten a copy of them, a file of them. So it's a case-by-case basis on document transparency, just like it always was. But I think in the current environment, there may be some more, acknowledgement that we need more transparency now than ever before, and maybe that will be provided regardless, or with an NDA.
Okay, great thoughts there. Brad, anything you wanted to add on this topic?
Yeah, so again, most of these documents, valuation policy is pretty standard to obtain beforehand. So restrictions on that normally isn't high. Sometimes compliance, things of that nature, are a little bit harder to obtain. But again, if they are fine for us to do it via virtual Teams, let's say just a Teams session, and they have Teams in their office, then we can do a file share, and we can literally take control of their file and review the file into its entirety, which we have done of recent. Also, if they do not have access to Teams or another type of video conferencing system that has that ability, what managers have been doing is putting the file in an Intralinks folder and providing us access on a time amount, usually of 24 hours. So we have 24 hours to review that file, and then that file is removed from the Intralinks, and you have no ability to do to download it. You can only view it, and that's it. So those would have been some of the ways. And I think somebody mentioned something about background checks and how that's been affected. There has been very minimal effect on background checks, but there will be at times where, you know, your state or local courthouse is not open. So those items would have to be filled in at a later date, or they're providing that transparency in the near future. But we've only come across that a few times in the past 6 weeks, and both of them have been subsequently closed out with information from those local agencies.
Okay, well, great insights. Thanks very much to our panelists, Brad Stehle of StepStone Group and Mike Merrigan of Shadmoor Advisors, for providing a very fulsome discussion today on ODD during quarantine. And thank you to all the participants as well for choosing to spend this time with the Diligence Vault community. As ever, we appreciate feedback, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd appreciate your suggestions regarding content for future Diligence Vault webinars as well. So once again, great discussion. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, participants. And thank you for visiting the vault. Bye now.
Thanks, Heidi. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Heidi.
Thanks. Bye.